help you, or you can come find me after and I can check in myself. Just as you heard Dr. Hobbs say, we're running a little late because our buffet line was quite long, so we're starting 15 minutes late, we're going to go 15 minutes later. Everything just starts 15 minutes later, but then we'll finish up over lunch. We'll just shorten lunch a little bit. All right, so it's my pleasure to introduce our first breakout session in the morning with Dr. Ann Hobbs and Dr. Julie Garman, and we'll let them take over and come to our breakouts. Yay, good morning. Woo.
Good morning. Some of you don't know this, but I'm on a totally different time zone. So I'm ready to go. It's like 9 p.m. my time, I think. So if this had been 4 p.m., my face would go down. So I hope this morning will be interesting for most of you. What we have on in CAP is, I'm on the 9 p.m. mode. We want to talk to you a little bit about program evaluation, but we're going to really be going, like, think about a funnel. We're going to be thinking about kind of what's been done, why we do evaluation, all the way down to what to expect for next year. So, show of hands, how many people are currently funded by community-based aid for juvenile services dollars? And most of you. So this will be super relevant, and I'll just tell you right now, please speak up at the end because you're not going to hurt our feelings. We know this is hard. We'd love to hear from you. We know some things are not useful. Sometimes they are useful. That's what we want to hear because we're already prepping for next year. So, okay. And we'll talk a little bit about, there are other centers like what JJI does. There's some other centers like us, but we're fairly unique. And I'll talk a little bit about that. But really the goal of today is to talk about where we've been with this with evidence-based Nebraska and go into next year, looking at next year. So without further ado, why do we do program evaluation, right? What's the goal? What was the legislature thinking? So I like to think of it as a scale because, you know, like there's different days. Sometimes you get on the scale and it's because you really want to make a change in your life. And sometimes you get on the scale and you're like, I'm just maintaining, I'm just gonna stick with this number, right? And get through to the wedding or whatever, right? So sometimes though, like you're in a really different mindset and you really want to improve something. And so I think as a program, if you're running a program, one of the things you need to think about when you're looking at your goals and your benchmarks is like just trying to maintain, like it's not, there's no judgment. Like sometimes our programs are pretty well oiled and they're doing what we need to do for our communities. But other times we really do need to change something. And then sometimes you don't know. And so the goal of our evaluations is really for you to be able to spot something that needs to be changed. So you want to think of the scale as, hey, Tammy, good morning. You're totally fine. Sorry to call you out. I was just excited to see you. I was always that kid in class. So really, you want to think of the scale as more of a, if you had a scale that told you body fat index and how much water you had in your body, I don't even know if scales can do that, but if that kind of finite detail is really where you want to get with an evaluation, and you're going to see that by the time we're done presenting today, because it's not about how many kids you serve or what their demographics are, it's really, are you serving the right kids with the right dosage, right? So you really want to be much more in-depth than a basic scale. But because of the evaluations that we're doing for the state, we work with about 240 programs, and so everybody's at a slightly different level, right? So that's why I encourage you to think of it as a scale, but kind of think about like where are you at with your program. Okay, the other thing with the scale is whether or not you trust it. And so thinking about this from a data lens, right? And I'll just tell you straight up, I am absolutely convinced, I'm not even joking, my doctor's scale is wrong. I'm not even joking, like I think they make it a couple pounds higher for medication reasons. I mean, this is my theory, but that if they put you on a medication, they don't want to overdose you. So I'm like, because I go in there and every time I compare his numbers to my numbers, I'm like, you are wrong, right? So I totally sympathize when programs call me and they say, you are wrong, because it could be, right? Like when we look at data, it's not, people tend to think it's very black and white and objective, right? And especially when you start digging in and cross-cutting things, and especially when we look at race numbers, how people capture race is absolutely inaccurate. It just is across the board. And there's lots of reasons which we can, I'm happy to answer any of those questions if you want to. But when you're looking at data, like you have to look at like who's entering it in your office, right? Are they using all of the right fields? Because we come across this all the time. Somebody will be like, oh, I just entered that in, enter date of birth into file number. We totally, this is a real life example. Like, okay, well, we didn't know to look there. So whether or not it's getting entered correctly is one piece. Whether or not anybody's ever checking it, because even the most detail-oriented person can misenter things. But then also when it gets exported, does it get exported correctly? For years I've worked with the detention center here locally, and they're convinced that the way things extract doesn't come out right. So that kind of the electronic process can have a problem, and then who's analyzing it, right? So we've had some recent experiences. If the people analyzing it don't fully understand juvenile justice programming and how it works in Nebraska, then we can have all sorts of problems. So you can see across the board, there can be a million problems that go wrong with data. So the best scenario, and what we try to always do, is to give it back to the programs and say, hey, look at this. Does this match your experience? And it's not because we're total idiots, it's because we know how many things can go wrong. So we try as much as possible to get to a point where we can trust the scale. Because if you can't trust the scale, then you're never going to be at a point where the legislature wanted Nebraska to be. So where, I'm going to go back to that one. Where the legislature wanted Nebraska to be. So most of you know, JJI has been around for more than 20 years. We were originally a public policy institute, so we didn't usually we did evaluations only if counties called us. But in 2015, when the legislature put this into statute, it was originally they wanted all community-based programs to be funded using an evidence-based model. And programs were like, what? Right? So that eventually moved to measuring, the language now says we're charged with measuring, the Juvenile Justice Institute is charged with measuring the effectiveness of programs funded through community-based aid. So the reason that's important is think about effectiveness. Think about if you all said right now, and your life depends on this, tell us what diet is effective. Could I do it? No way, right? Because it depends on what do you need. Are you training to be an Olympic athlete? Are you trying to lose 2 pounds? Are you trying to lose 50 pounds? Like each of your needs and each of your program needs are quite different. So figuring out what's effective is really, really complicated. But the goal of the legislature was really so we would all get to a point where each of our programs can improve with the thing that you need to improve. So going back to the scale example, right? If you're the person who needs to lose 2 pounds, that's what you're doing. If you're training for the Olympics or training to be an elite athlete, it's a really different diet and exercise regime. And so that's what each of us needs to do when we look at your programs, when we look at your outcome numbers, when we look at your recidivism or future system involvement. That's what the legislature really intended. So you might be saying, well, Ann, how do you know what they intended? The reason is we sat down with lawmakers at the time when they had evidence-based language in the statute, and we're like, this is not going to work, and it's not going to work for rural Nebraska. It's too expensive to pull a model evidence-based program. We don't have therapists out there to do functional family therapy. Like, this won't work. The way we're going to do evidence-based Nebraska, or the way we recommend as a university, is that we have programs look at their own data and use a system of continuous improvement. So that's exactly what this statute and what all of our reports were designed to do. Have we gotten there? Not quite yet, but we'll keep working on it. So it's really designed that when you have your data, when you're in this cycle, right, that you look at a piece of data, which we're going to get there by the end of today, and let's say you look at your data and you say, oh, wow, I'm enrolling 100 kids every year, and 10% are Native Americans, and none of them enroll. When you look at that piece of data right away, all of you would probably have an idea of something that needs to change. What would it be? In the example I just gave. You're enrolling 100 kids, 10% are Native American, and no Native American youth enroll. What needs to change?
Figure out how to
Right, right. So you have a certain population that's not engaging. We don't know why, right? We don't know what specific diet we need yet, but that's exactly what, when you look at your data, when you see a number like that, that's where you come up with what are you gonna do? And then when you implement it, you need to go back and remeasure it. So when it says study, it doesn't even mean us. All of you now, I think, can download your JCMS data. you can pick a time cycle, like every 6 months, every 3 months, you can download it and see, wow, did that number go up? Wow, I'm now enrolling 2 Native American youth, or 2%. It's improved, maybe not where I wanted it. So, I'm gonna go back to this other, oh, I'm going forward, I'm gonna go backwards, why am I going forward?
You're going worse.
Close
Close your eyes.
Go back to the beginning.
Well, that's the whole thing. There you go. That's
That's
over.
me. Oh, it's easy. All right, birthday committee. I hate technology.
It's over.
Sorry, so sorry, Julie. Julie's like, you're going where to stop. So I'll talk for a minute. So this slide that you're gonna see originally said, university.
What?
It's next Monday.
Okay.
There.
You sure you got it?
Yeah. So this slide originally said, evidence-based Nebraska is unique, and I was like, oh, I don't know. So I had a lot of angst, and I checked it out, and I said, there's a lot of centers nationwide, but I'll tell you why this is a unique project. So there are centers in other states, right? California has a Center for Evidence-Based Corrections, it's both juvenile and adult. Florida does, their Department of Justice does internal research, they're one of the few that doesn't do it at a university. And their goal is to advance juvenile justice knowledge, so specifically juvenile justice. Washington State, a lot of you have heard of WISIP, it's a public policy institute, does a ton of studies, puts it out there. They're probably most similar to us, but they do adult. Pennsylvania uses the evidence-based prevention at the center. So we see these, Ohio has one, New York has one, Illinois has one. So even though there's centers out there doing this, most of them are resource centers that are like, call us if you want an evidence-based model. We have not found another state right now that's trying to do statewide evaluations of 240 programs. And the reason is it's crazy, right? It's like giving you all the same diet. You can't do it, and it's not the right way to do it. So what we try to do then is to give you individual measures of each of your programs so you can help us make those changes, make those tweaks that can bring you to being the best program you can be. Without putting you on that track of, I have to go out and buy the $1 million project where I need to train my staff annually. So I'm happy, I have a report of these. The reason we know this is an agency, I'll pull up the report if you want it, but an agency came out and interviewed JJI when we were going through this list of different states doing these. And we ended up one of their case studies because we were like, you guys are doing something really unique. So it's not just us saying we're unique, it's unusual to try to evaluate this many programs. So that's kind of where we're at today, right? We know what we're doing is unique, it's probably difficult to do, but all of you who know me is like, not gonna quit, we're gonna do this. And then my team are like, that's crazy, let's not do it. It's tough to do. So what we've done in the past, if you ever go to our website, the Evidence-Based Nebraska website, you'll see black covered reports and white covered reports and then some of these briefs. So I want to explain the difference so you understand the process, and then we're going to get to some of these individual measures. And today you're not going to get a sample of every single program because we would be here for literally at least 8 hours today. So you're going to get samples of 2 different program types, so you can know how to read the report when it comes back out. But when you go to the website, the black reports, periodically over the years, what we've done are reports on specific program types. So think about diversion programs. Statewide, we have about 65 diversion programs, right? So what we've tried to do is internally use yourselves as your own benchmark. So we could go out and look at like, what do diversion programs in New York State do? But you all would probably be like, well, that's not really comparable to us. So what we do when we put out these black covered reports is we're usually diversion or truancy or crisis response. What we're doing is reporting on all of the programs that are that program type. And how do you compare to other programs, right? So we have programs that sometimes tell us, well, my risk factors in, let's say, Omaha are really different than Adams County. That might be true, right? But still, you're going to get a comparison of what does your future system look like compared to the next guy's, all around diversion programs, because the goals are same for the diversion programs. Same thing with truancy programs, right? And it's not that our communities aren't unique or different, or that you don't have different risk factors or protective factors. It's just, we have to give you something, and the best comparison is the county next to you, or the county in our state. So, So what we've done in the past is we've looked at any of the black reports or program types, right? Any of this these kind of look at are just briefs. They're more policy briefs, or things like, should you do UAs with your kids? Is that beneficial? How does mental health impact juvenile justice outcomes? And then the white report, which is what we're going to be going through today. I'm afraid to touch the buttons now, though. No, they weren't. The white reports, if you go out on the website, those annual reports cover all the programs in Nebraska that we evaluate. And so that's where we really get into that, like 240 plus programs, different outcomes. That's one, it went out recently and you're gonna get an updated version if you haven't gotten that in your inbox, but look at it after we go through it today. So the goal of that is really, again, grouping usually by program type, is for you to be able to look at it and get a snapshot of your program so you know, am I missing 10% of the Native American population, or am I not serving the right population? Am I enrolling enough kids? Are they all ending up in detention centers? Like, we really want you to just get a quick snapshot. And next year, I think what we're going to be doing is going a little bit more in depth. So most of you know this year, what we did is we had 2 tiers and then a training program. And I'll tell you straight up, I don't think that this didn't really get to the heart of the intent of the statute the way we wanted it to. And the reason is, I'll start with tier 2. There were just a handful of programs that got that full in-depth evaluation. And I think for those programs it was useful because it gave them a really in-depth look at their program. But following that model, it would take us the next 20 years to get to all of the programs. And by that time, the world so dramatically changed, right? Like, we had to start over. So we're really kind of constantly searching for that model. And that's why at the end of today, I really want to hear from you, your thoughts on this. But we were looking for that model, like what's the most effective way to look at data for all of you where you can say, oh, I see what needs to be changed. Or I see an idea for innovation. I see something different I can do. And then we can see in the next cycle how it changes. So that's really, this year when we did tier 2, like I said, I think it benefited those programs. It was a really deep dive. But internally, I don't know if people know this, JJI is a team of 5, if you include our kind of administrative assistant, and only one other researcher on staff, like in-depth researcher. So we can't possibly do 200 of these in the next decade, probably, right? So we're looking for a model that can meet the statutory requirements and get you something useful like tomorrow. And that's tricky. So this year, the other thing that we did is tier 1, and that's where we're going to be looking at in a minute. That's the snapshot that we try to give programs so they can see are there things that need to change, or things I can do better. And then this year we also did a whole series of training that it'll be out there on the website, but we won't be doing as much training next year. So, as I mentioned, tier 2, I think they provided really rich data for the programs about the youth that they serve, the demographics, their outcomes, whether or not they're meeting each of those outcomes. But the downside is I had hoped some of that would be generalizable to other programs. So let's say you're looking at a diversion program and you're looking at, I don't serve a high enough population of one demographic. It really doesn't generalize. It doesn't mean anything to the county next door. And so we're like, even though it was deep dive, and I'll pick on Casey, we did one for the mediation centers. I don't know that your report will speak to at all to Michelle's programs because it just doesn't, like the population you serve. So it didn't quite work, to be transparent. It didn't work the way I had hoped it would. And like I said, we don't have enough years in our lifetime to do everybody's in-depth evaluation. So next year we'll be going a slightly different direction from what we can tell. With the tier 1 overview, and that's really where we're going to spend the rest of this morning, what we did is we took all of the data that we had from the Crime Commission, July 1, 2021 through November 30th, 2022. So right away, you're going to see this under limitations. The time frame's weird, right? So some of this is just logistical problems of staffing, right? So the reason we selected that time frame is the Crime Commission needed time to analyze that data, and it comes to us and we need time to analyze that data. but we realized it caused a significant problem with the data. You'll hear about it. But what we were trying to do was provide a snapshot of all the youth referred to your programs, the demographics, and then whether or not you hit the benchmarks or the outcome goals on those required deliverables. So most of you will probably remember we tried to restrict some of the required variables this year. We thought, okay, if you have fewer variables, will they be completed? We didn't really see that pattern. We didn't see that less meant better completion. So that's exactly kind of where we're at as we head into this. So as you look at this analysis of the Tier 1 programs, and I'm going to pass out some of the tables, because those of you who have seen those white covered reports know that there's a ton of tables. So there are limitations when you do this. So for example, when we work with rural areas, if there's less than 10 cases, we really can't report out on them. Because I live in a town of 100, if you report out on 10 cases and one of them was African American, everybody in my community is going to know that's my kid. So we absolutely don't, we have, and you'll see this in the report, if you see dashes, it means we couldn't report out because there were too few cases. Also, sometimes looking at data in the aggregate, when you're looking at a whole group of programs, what we see is it masks things. You can't see specific program level things that can change when you look at aggregate data. We had programs that have absolutely no data. Not just programs, like 69 programs showed up as not having any data. So we don't know why that's happening. We know that's not in line with statute, so we have to figure that out. You're gonna hear our awesome plan. But the other issue, and this probably goes back to, we saw low success rates for programs. So programs didn't close their cases out as successful. And we think this is related to that time frame. Because we had to pull the data November 30th, programs might not have closed their cases, right? It wasn't December, especially like school-based programs. That's not even the end of the semester. So that time frame we think was really problematic. So these are all things that we want to revise and look at, do differently next year, because we want it to be a fair representation of who your program serves, but also what does the community-based aid do for the resident, right? So bigger than any of our individual programs, this is a legislative program that's really designed to serve youth before they get deeper in the system. And that's why we look at things like whether or not the youth had subsequent law violations, ended up on probation or in detention. So because that's the goal, we want to make sure this is as accurate as possible. And pulling at that specific time frame was really problematic. We think that's what led to really low, it looks like low success rates, or few cases were closed. It's just a phenomenon of when you pull a case. So I'm going to turn it over to Julie, and then we'll come back together and be talking about next year, what we'll do next time.
Oh, I don't know if I should ask for instructions on how to use this or just go for it. So we're gonna go for it. So this kind of hopefully will give you just an idea in terms of the youth that are going to be included in that Tier 1 evaluation. These statewide numbers, in terms of what you're gonna see here, are not included in the report, only because it's already like 60, 70 pages. I pulled these for the presentation just to give you guys an idea. Statewide, we had data on over 9,000 youth or cases included. You can tell there with age, average age is hitting somewhere around 15 to 16 years old. And then we had the majority of the cases included were male at 56%. So again, not super surprising based upon what we know about youth that typically are more involved in the system or on their way to that. Okay, in terms of race, broke this out. These are probably maybe hard to read because, I don't know, my eyesight is failing as I age. The white, or the gray there on the right-hand side is white for race. The blue here would be African American Black. This darker gray color, Hispanic, yellow is American Indian or Native American. And then the red there includes other. Now when you get into the actual Tier 1 report, you'll see these same demographics reported statewide for each program type. These kinds of things are reported in the same way. So age, there'll be a distribution for statewide. Same with gender, and same with race, broken out into these categories. So I just want you to be clear that with other, that includes any cases that were coded as other race, multiple races. It includes cases coded as Asian, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, and also some cases in there coded as unspecified.
Is that each a unique individual, or are there duplicated counts in their multiple contacts?
So these are each individual case. So when the data analysis was done, any youth that had been in a program more than one time was only counted as one. Okay, yes, these are not duplicated. Great question, thank you. And then on the right there, these are statewide numbers for future system involvement for, again, all cases.
I wanted to piggyback on that question. So
Sure.
what about young people that may go into a diversion program and part of the diversion may do another program that's under community-based aid? Are those two separate cases or is it?
So it gets kind of sticky and kind of murky. Casey, I'm going to use your program as an example because we just worked through that. Casey was kind enough to open the doors to the mediation center this year, and we did a tier 2 evaluation on their data, which was really a great experience for JJI and hopefully for the program as well. But that kind of gets into what Michelle's talking about. So cases referred to the mediation center in Lancaster County here. Go in, they work with the mediators and the center, and then those cases are discharged when the center decides that the individual has completed or fulfilled the expectations for them. When the center discharges those cases, they're then sent back to Lancaster County Diversion to complete the rest of their diversion case plan. Casey, correct me or throw something at me if I got any of that wrong. So it leaves some kind of like gray area in some of the data, right? So these cases eventually will be in the mediation center data sets. They'll also be in the diversion data sets. So there are potentially some repeat cases or the same youth that would appear in mediation data as well as diversion. Yeah.
So they could be successful with one program and maybe not the other.
Yeah, so cases could successfully discharge out of mediation and then go back to diversion. Something could happen, you know, there could be a death in the family, the kid could have to move, and they wouldn't be able to successfully finish that diversion case plan, and then they would end up being, you know, unsuccessfully discharged or, you know, not able to participate type of thing. Yeah, great question, Michelle.
And one of the other last thing, years ago when we talked about this with lawmakers, one of the specific questions that Chris asked was, he wanted to know how many programs does a youth do and are they more or less successful? So we haven't quite gotten to that analysis, but eventually through this data we should be able to count. Because they are compartmentalized, we can see how many different types of programs a youth has done.
And we were just talking about this internally last week. It's also this issue of like internal recidivism, right? So if we have one youth who keeps coming back to your program and they come in every year, you see them. In terms of this data, they're counted in terms of the last discharge, if that's a success type of thing. But there is that issue of internal recidivism. Obviously, they keep coming back in the door. That's costing you resources. That's time you're putting into serving that youth. So it's not always a perfect system, and this is how research is. And so it's constantly just we're working through it, trying to figure out the best ways that we can capture that data, and also how we can best help support programs in working through how do we, you know, identify these youth that are maybe coming back into the system more, and how can we target better outcomes for those youth. So statewide, again, future system involvement numbers, overall really low. Typically, state of Nebraska, these numbers are fairly typical. Law violations, though, at 0.9, that is like so incredibly low. Sorry for walking in front of the screen. So incredibly low. Probation, the highest there at 8%. We did have some issues with the original version of the report that went out with probation numbers. They did not get moved over, so you'll see if you look at that version we sent out a couple of weeks ago, probation everywhere is 0. That's why our numbers did not get moved over. The report that we will send out next week will have all the probation data updated. But statewide, these are the numbers, again, with those 9,120 cases that we had in the data. Does anyone else have any questions about the demographic data or any of this type of stuff before I move on?
Okay, really quick. And maybe we're gonna talk about this when we look at the tables that I can pass out, but when you look at your data, law violations and status violations are within a certain time frame after you complete the program. with detention, we looked at, since the youth completed the last successful closure, did they ever go to detention? So it's a slightly different timeline. So just know when you look at your report, detention is slightly different.
Yeah, sorry, I should have clarified that. Ann is correct. So the way that we calculate status offense, law violation, and probation is the youth is discharged from the program that date. And then we look at that court matched data from Jammin to see if the youth had a referral for a law violation, a status offense, or if they were adjudicated and placed on formal probation. And if it's been 1 year following the time that they were discharged, then that counts as, yes, this happened. If a youth has more than one, if they have both a status offense and a law violation, we would only count the law violation as that's most serious. And if a youth has 2 law violations, we only count that as 1 in terms of they had future system involvement, 1 yes versus 0 no.
And under race, is that entered, how they entered it or how they reported their race?
Good question. Everybody's different, is the answer. Like, I don't, in this room, how many of you, sorry, I jumped in.
No, you're fine, you're
How
fine.
many of you allow the youth to self-identify their own race? And how many use the law enforcement record? Oh, so there's your answer. So
We use both.
you use both, so the law enforcement sends you one and then you have the youth self-identify.
We have some law enforcement agencies that don't put anything in.
Yeah, So it's, I mean, it's getting better and better, we're getting more consistent, like in this room alone, we see that's getting better, that it should be self-reported, because we don't always know what race somebody is, so they should tell us. Yeah.
I know one thing that we've seen in some of our probation data is when you have other and you have Hispanic, they're kind of being double captured because they're like, well, I don't really fit here, but I identify as this. And I know that because we allow self-identification too. And so I think that it could also lead to some duplication if they don't fully understand
Yeah.
what those categories mean.
Yeah.
And we did add an ethnicity variable to JCMS just last year, it became required. Still don't have great completion on that, and that's, we're hoping, because that uses more of the census definitions, we're hoping to more clearly tap into those youth, especially the ones that are Hispanic or Latino identified, to be sure we can get that. But again, right now, I think people are figuring out how to use it, and if they have data that they can put in.
We try to fill out all the categories, the race, self-identified, all 3 of those on there. So which one do you pull from?
It depends on what data we get. Typically in the data sets that we receive, those extracts, we get race and ethnicity. And we also get, I forget what the other one is. There's one where they can put in specifically like, oh, I'm from Burma, right? Or I'm Sudanese, and they can identify, or type in, Amy, correct me if I'm wrong, where they can identify that. We get all of that data. The problem is that for a lot of our reporting, there's not a lot of data there. So we might have a program that has, 50 youth, but then there's like 1 case reported like, oh, I'm Burmese, right? And then, so it's hard in the context of some of our reports to be able to put every single bit of that information in there. Yeah, but with you, when you extract your data yourself from the JCMS, that's something you would also be able to pull from that report. Yeah, no problem. So Ann has some photocopies of a couple of different program types that are included in the Tier 1 evaluation. That we're gonna.
You should end up with 2 pages when you're done. One starting here, one starting there, and then swap. Sorry.
No, you're fine. The first one that I'm going to talk briefly about is the Alternative to Detention Program.
Thank you.
Do we have anybody in the house that is an ADT? It sounds like I'm playing fracking or something. Okay, yeah, I've read your name on lots of things. Where are you at again? Okay.
So what the reasons we're focusing on these 2 program types, we're just gonna go a little bit more in depth, and we're gonna have you look at the tables, but we frequently in the state do kind of highlight aversion and truancy. So we're kind of thinking of programs that we don't always talk about.
Yeah.
Sorry, we should have made them a
Oh,
different
yeah.
color or something.
Also, I'm so sorry if you didn't, you should get 2 copies. If you didn't get one, if you could please share with your neighbor. When we looked at the app last night, only 13 people were gonna be here at 8:30, so we made 20 copies. And then more people came. So if you don't mind sharing, that would be fabulous.
We have 2 that are the same back here.
Oh,
The same copies.
Are yours the same?
Exactly the same.
you should have one that says alternative, one should say measures for alternative to detention, and the other should say measures for prevention promotion programs. They're gonna look very similar, but they should have those 2 different labels.
Alternative to detention or both.
Okay, give me one of them. Anybody have a duplicate for prevention promotion?
So no, you should have an alternative to detention one.
Thank you. There you go.
Thank you.
So
And if you
again,
did not get one at all,
I do not, well, we're sharing.
okay, I think I have some extras here.
I think they needed an ABCD one.
The alternative.
Here's an alternative, and I might have another one. Okay. Fabulous. Here. There's prevention promotion. All right. Think you did it.
Perfect. Okay, so again, when you get the updated copy of the teacher report evaluation that will be coming out next week, for each program type, there's kind of a cover page where we group together all of the programs under that program type to report out on some statewide numbers, just to kind of give a little snapshot of kind of what's going on in the state. So this is the cover sheet for the ABT programs. You'll see there at the top, it says total programs 35. Those are the ones that are included in the tables. And these programs serve 340 youth, or have 340 youth with data in terms of what we can report on in the tables. Again, population demographics, like I explained earlier, these are grouped in the same way that I grouped that statewide data. So again, that other races box is going to have all those youth or those cases that were other race, multiple races, Asian, Native Hawaiian, or unspecified. Same thing there with the age. You're going to get an average age statewide by program type. So if you're an ADT program in the statewide, the programs on average served youth that were 11.4 years old. You kind of compare where your program was at with that number. And then on average, more men or more males compared to females that were involved in these ADT programs. Future system involvement there on the bottom, again, this is statewide. So all youth that were discharged from an ADT program in one of our funded programs, that number essentially, we look at how many had status offenses, how many had law violations, probation, or were detained, and we divide that out of how many cases were closed, okay, across the state. So these are statewide numbers, and then you will also see, once you get into the actual tables, that there are program level data reported at the level of your specific program. So at the beginning, again, of every program type summary in your report, you have that cover sheet. The next couple of paragraphs that you're going to see by program type are these explanations of just a little brief description of what those program types are. And then you're going to have a paragraph about what measures are included for that program type. Some of these are the same across program types, so if you're curious about what a school-based program is doing compared to truancy, you can look to see how those measures are the same, and then in some ways how they're different or how we measure things differently for different program types. So for ADT programs, the measures that we include in the tables are going to be the demographics of those youth enrolled. Again, that's at the program level for programs reporting data on more than 10 cases. Like Ann mentioned, programs that had data on less than 10 cases, we did not report out on demographics. That data is masked just for privacy purposes. Process measures for each program type. These are program type specific generally. For ADT, we looked at percent of youth detained at discharge, percent of youth who attended court, percent of youth reporting program progress, how many were discharged home, and what percentage of youth were successfully discharged from the program. We also had a number of outcome measures by program type, again, depending on what type of program it was. For ADT, we looked at how many cases were closed with discharge dates. Again, trying to look at what's important for the programs to know, what are your overall program goals based upon the type of program. With ADTs, really, right, our goal is to get kids through the program and out of the program and successfully return them home and not have them with a future detainment. And then, of course, we looked at future system involvement. Same thing as we typically do. The lengthier definition of future system involvement and how we code that is available on our website. But if you ever have any questions about that, please feel free to ask or email me or what have you. So again, for the purposes of what's up on here, although I'm sure that most of you probably can't read these, thanks to Anne for making copies. It's really difficult to include a whole bunch of data into tables. Not just for us in terms of formatting, because frankly we only have so many inches of space to put things in, but also on your side, with how much is there to digest, right? And how much is there that we can take away. So we try to again capture these process measures and outcome measures that have been identified as important in terms of looking at program progress and case success. So this up here is table 8. This is the demographic and process measure table from the ADT program group. Each program type will have 2 separate tables. The first one being a demographic and process measure table like this, and then the second one being an outcome table like we'll look at with prevention and promotion programs here in a minute. So with ADT, again, what you'll see is, and how you should look at these in terms of looking at your own data. Starting on the left-hand side, program name and the county. The next column here, the first one with numbers in it, how many youth were enrolled? Okay, and you can see here, I'm going to pick on Buffalo County ADT Trackers program. They had 2 youth with, that were enrolled with data in the JCMS at the time that this data was pulled, because they had 2 youth who were not able to report out on demographic information, which is why you see dashes in these boxes, or in these cells here. Now moving down to ADT electronic monitoring for Dodge County. They had 11 cases that had data included. We were able to report out on the specific demographics. In terms of race, we looked at percent white is what is reported in here. And then ethnicity, percent Hispanic Latino. Gender here in this box, percent male. And then with age, we pulled the average age or the mean, as well as the standard deviation for age. Standard deviation is just hopefully gives you a way to understand what that distribution of age is like in your program. So one way to think about it is a high standard deviation. I'm going to use these 2 to compare here. Dodge County standard deviation is 4 compared to Dakota County at 1.35. It means Dodge County's youth are probably more spread apart in age. Okay, the variation in terms of the age of their youth is more widely spread than what Dakota County saw. So Dakota County's kiddos were more likely around the same age. Again, process measures for ADT, we looked at percent detained at discharge. All of these percents are reported as how many of those youth were coded as having, reporting progress. If there was reported progress at discharge, that youth was included, and then we would say 81% of those 11 youth reported discharge of progress. I'm gonna speed up because Amy just held up my hurry butt up sign. Promotion, prevention programs, again, the cover sheet, all of these are gonna look the same program type, or for program types. Obviously different data, but again, looking at the number of youth served and kind of how those compare in terms of future system and involvement numbers. So these are the specific measures that are included in promotion prevention programs. Again, it should be on your sheet. For these, we looked at the process measures of if youth matched the target population and how many youth were successful. And then outcome measures, closed cases, how many youth had activity data, what percent of youth attended the program most days, and the most common activity type and percent of cases. So the promotion prevention programs are asked to record activities that youth participate in. So we looked at the most common activity type because I believe it's on a footnote at the bottom of one of these sheets. Yeah, on the bottom of page 48, you can see we have like 11 different program activity types. So again, in terms of being able to report that in a table, that's the reason that we include most common, just because we're limited space-wise. So again, this is the second table. So every program type has both a demographic and process measure table, as well as this outcome measure and future system involvement table. So with ADT, I showed you the first table. With promotion prevention, we're going to look at the second one. Again, these are all going to be different depending upon your specific program type, but the format should be kind of similar. So you should have name of the program county. For this one, we have cases closed on this second table. Okay, so this again is the number of youth that had data entered on a discharge date. That we could say that youth had been discharged and that case was closed in the program. For percent success, you see a percent number here and then a number in parentheses afterward. Percent success is just that. So that top program there, Adams County, on U, Horizon Life Skills, they had a 100% success rate. So for those 30 cases, they had 30 cases that were closed. And closed successfully in this case. So the number here below is going to represent the number of youth that were coded as having a successful discharge. Okay, we only were reporting out on percent successful discharge in this report, which we've had some questions and gotten some feedback from programs. It's not a perfect system, and we're hoping to maybe tweak things as we move forward. It's hard with programs like diversion, for example, where there's successful case closures, there's did not participate, and then there's unsuccessful case closures. Like I said, for the purpose of this report, we're only reporting percent successful because we just don't have the space to break out all of the other particular discharge reasons. So if you have questions about any of that, if we don't have time to chat today, my email is always open. I'm happy to give you my phone number and we can talk about kind of how that looks and how that works. Again, these are pretty similar to what we talked about before. Number of youth with activity data, percent that reported most days, and then going into the future system involvement. So kind of like you saw in the program type statewide tables, these are in a similar format. So we report out on the percent of youth that had some type of future system involvement, and that number bracketed below is going to be the number of cases. Okay, so for Healing Circulars Facilitator in Douglas County with probation, they had 2 youth that had a new probation adjudication following program discharge within a year out of the 27 cases that they had closed, which gives them a 7.4% rate of future system involvement for probation. I know that's a very fast run through those. Anybody have any questions off the top? Yes.
Who was this report pulled? Who was this report pulled? Was it this year? Was it?
So this report covers data from July 1st, 2021 through, and the data referral date that we closed on was November 30th, 2022. So any cases referred during that time frame would be included. Yeah.
I apologize if I missed this when you said this. So under the percentage success column, is there a number set that you're like, if you're hitting this bar, then you're doing well, even though we're always looking for improvement, versus if you're below this bar, we really gotta look at your program and whether or not this is effective?
I mean, not really. The problem is, like Ann was talking about in terms of a diet, it's really hard. And especially when it comes to looking at percent success, like take this with a grain of salt, like all of these. Like
The numbers are just so different.
well, primarily because we are only able to pull a snapshot of time. So no matter how we work that out, we're always gonna have some cases that are gonna be open. And there's just not a great, perfect system for us to do that. So,
I was just gonna say, on these reports, they're basically gonna be used by the crime commission and the legislature look at future dollar allotments and what programs should be used more often than others? Is that basically what the use of the?
I don't know, I can't speak for the congressman or the legislature, but I will tell you, we haven't gotten to a point where there's a consistent, ideally you have a report like this that comes out consistently every year, and then you can see, wow, my success rate went from 80% to 30, what's going on? And so we've not, because we've done such a variety of reports, we've never gotten to that report, or that point. So if they ever called me, I would say exactly that. I would say, I don't think we're at that point. Like, what we have, and the other thing is, if your program is a rural program and serves 2 kids, and you have a 50% failure rate, that was, what if you had one tough case?
Yeah.
Like, we can't think of data that way. We can't think of numbers that way, right? It really should be that internal self-reflection process of, is this worse than last year? Did I improve? It's got to be that way.
And we're hoping like moving forward and we're able to again capture data and capture really good, accurate data and report out on it in similar ways moving forward with a bit more consistency, that we'll be able to see some of those trends a little bit better.
Well, that's kind of where my brain was, is I'm like, if you see from year to year to year that 30%, is this adequately resourced? Do they have what they need? Is this the right service for this community?
Right.
And is that something that is also included as part of the analysis?
I don't know if you guys saw it, but even when you look at these different program types, I don't know if you can go back, I'm afraid to touch.
Sure, I can.
So look at this, one of the things that really jumped out at me, look at our prevention programs. It appears that we're serving mostly minority youth, only 16, so we can already see some really big trends, but we're like, what's going on here? And then when you look at alternatives to detention had the highest rate of going to probation, but that makes sense because it's that type of program. So I think we really have to keep, at least by program type, it's I think okay to compare some of those outcomes. But if we start going across the board, we're really serving very different populations. Now, circulose was an anomaly in prevention promotion. They appear, without looking at any other data, both circulose and urban mold, right? We can see they're probably serving a slightly different population because we're seeing that those kids are hitting future system involvement and probation specifically. Or they're getting referred from probation and going back to probation. So,
Which again was one of the benefits I felt, at least with the tier 2 evaluations. We were able to take, at least with Casey's stuff too, looking at rates of detention over a period of time, or rates of future system involvement over a period of time, to see how, I think it was last year, you guys had virtually none. Like law violations just were like 2%. Like it was so low from where you could see how it had tracked before, and they were so low. That's the benefit of, again, having more data to be able to do that, but also making sure that it's, again, manageable, because we're a small shop, and, this time span of data, over 9,000 cases. Like, it's a heavy lift, and again, us trying to make sure that, again, going back to that scale, making sure that we are cleaning and coding the data correctly and understanding it, and that we're reporting it out accurately, and giving you time to review it, to make changes if we need to. So we're not at that perfect process yet, but I think there are, like Ann was talking about, snippets of things that programs can take out to hopefully be able to say this is where I'm doing well and this is where I need to improve. But overall, like, it's very hard for us in the context of these reports to say this program is successful based on this particular benchmark, especially looking at success.
For our alternative to detention, we had 6 kids total, 2 for electronic monitoring and 4 for document tracking, but those were all for pre-adjudication until they were adjudicated, but it kept them out of going to Madison or the other detention. So to me, they're 100% successful because the kids never went to detention.
Yeah.
So this is a perfect time to talk, and we only have a few more minutes, about next year, because what we're hoping to do next year, and we've gotten a glimpse, maybe we'll go back then.
Can we go back to that one?
We'll go back to the
Yeah.
So for next year, we're hoping to expand and maybe have some different graphics. So I would love to hear from you. We know these tables are hard to read. It's really about space. Even if we go to 4-page and go by program, individual programs, it'll be over 1,000-page report. So it won't be printed, it'll be online, right? But it'll give you maybe a little bit more detail by program. Again, one of the things you have to be ready for is, and we've already started working with the Crime Commission on this, in the first 2 months, it was before, like August and September, we're gonna be calling you if you have any missing data. So if you get those missing data reports, please pay attention, because it's gonna be a little bit different this year. We have students like in the ready, queued up to come to your office and help you enter it, like, we're serious. Like,
We are primarily concerned about programs with more than 20% missing data. If you've got 5% or 10% of your required variables missing, I mean, for your own benefit and for ours, try to clean it up, obviously, and input those things as you're able to. But we're really concerned about ones that have over 20% missing, just because it's absolutely impossible and irresponsible, it would be irresponsible of us to report out in terms of different kinds of outcome measures on data with such a high level of missing.
What's usually missing, the start date, end date, that's probably the most common on the survey.
closure date was a problem, but we think it's because of the November 30th date.
What'd you say?
Closure,
I mean,
date's not
discharge
closed.
date
Or discharge date,
can
yeah.
be problematic, but when it comes to, like, I'm gonna use family support as an example. Family communication and family intake that are measured at intake and discharge, or family function and family communication. When those variables are not entered, we cannot compare between intake and discharge. Obviously, again, going back to, we don't have cases that are discharged. There's nothing we can do because we don't have that back end measure. But just making sure that you have data entered for what you can is supremely important. And like I said, we will be reaching out over the next couple of months and offering assistance in terms of getting that data more clean.
So if you have cases that haven't been closed out, either it's not entered or it's not closed out, you don't have that ending date, do you take those out or do you include it? You take those out or?
So it depends. What you'll see in the tables is, in the first table, that demographic and process measures, any cases referred are going to be included in there, in that report. That includes cases that have not discharged yet.
But if you're looking at success when they close out the success, you'll take those out because
Yes.
you didn't have.
So then we're only using as that denominator those cases that have actually closed. Yep.
And I'll mention it too when I talk to the crime commission people, but there was a time where you would save stuff and it would give you the green screen like it was saved, and then you come back later and it wasn't saved for the next day. So if you've got a lot of data entry, you don't have the time to go back in and make sure what you did yesterday.
Yeah, remember
is still
where you
in there.
were.
So I don't know if their server's not big enough to handle the magnitude that's increased in the last couple of years or what, but I think they still have issues with it saving data that's entered the first time.
And we're also going to be talking to programs this year. Amy's going to send out this survey, which hopefully will not be a massive survey, but we're trying to get a lot of things covered at the first, like, front end of our year. Hopefully just one survey, but it may be a larger one. But asking programs again about if you have your own data entry systems, or if you're just using JCMS, if you have preferences between yours and JCMS. Again, we're trying to constantly improve and look for ways in which we can do this better, right? How can we do this better? How can we make it easier for programs to input data? How can we make what we give back to you more useful for you, for the legislature, for funders, this kind of thing. So please be on the lookout for this survey. Please respond to it. Like I said, we're hoping not to bombard you with a lot of surveys this year, but when that comes out, please send it out to your staff or whoever it is that does those, typically in response to those.
Also, go ahead.
When you're talking about percentage of youth by race, is there somewhere that you can find, that percentage of youth that live in your county?
Yeah, so next
Because that would be a huge factor in our, sharing our demographics.
Let me go back to this. And I don't know if Josie's gonna talk about it tomorrow at all during the training, but she may touch on it. We're doing our final evidence-based Nebraska training, it's just a plug tomorrow at 1:30. I'm not sure what room it's in, but it's here. Monica Miles-Steffens is gonna be presenting with Dr. Josie Schaefer, who's from the Center for Public Affairs Research at UNO. Josie is kind of a guru when it comes to U.S. Census data and Nebraska census data. They have resources available, I think, on their website where you can pull, like, plug in Saunders County, and it will pull up for you racial breakdowns. I think you can look at, socioeconomic factors. There's all different kinds of things.
And the
next-
universities and state colleges probably have that resource somewhere also, because
Yes.
those of us counties who have small colleges and things in your county really change your diversion program.
Yeah, and I would go to see Parsons, like, to the website
They are, I
itself.
think, only in 2021 now.
What's that?
For census data, are only in 2021 right now.
Yeah, that's the most updated.
Are they doing any statewide DMC stuff, or is it all up to each individual county to do their JJI stuff? I've been kind of out of the loop on that, but I'm just wondering if they do anything statewide.
Right now, it's pretty individualized, but I think the vision for next year's reports is to include county and to look at some of those DMC measures at different points in the system. So I think it's coming, it's just, this year it's just reporting out on your particular program so you can see what you've served, but, yeah. So if you have ideas for next year's report, if you're like, I would really like to know this, please don't just keep it, I mean, you can email Julie or I and tell us, you can tell Monica tomorrow, like, let it gel and really think about that, because we really want to get this to a point where you open the report and you're like, that is not the number I want on the scale, or that is the number I want on the scale, right? Like, you need to use this in a very practical kind of hands-on way. And yes, some things do go back to the funders and the legislature, but I would say the biggest risk is programs that don't enter data. Is really the biggest risk. So get your data, we get your students, we get your help.
I think we are over time.